Good afternoon, everyone. We are back in Exodus chapter 22 this afternoon. And these few chapters in 21, 22, 23, and into 24, you find that it is a series of judgments. So let me just put this. The judgments is called mishpat. These are judgments. Judgments with regards to man and man interaction. Now, as many people go through these chapters, oftentimes we're not quite sure what we are trying to come away with. It is important now for us to bear in mind that all these judgments has to do with justice. And we have to see that it is just to the victim as well as occasionally to the oppressor. It needs to be just all around. Now, why is it important that way? Is because God is a just God. God wants justice to be served. When someone is violating the peace and harmony of the human interaction, then there is a component when the violator will be judged. But the judgments that comes by need to be fair to him as well as to the victim. Now, occasionally you also see that it needs to be fair to the animal as well when it comes in question. So we are now in the middle of a series of chapters that deals with judgments. One of the things that we need to bear in mind is that these judgments are universal principles of justice. God is giving this to the Israelites at this point in time at Mount Sinai, is so that when they enter into the promised land, when they start living in their own society, in their own community, when trouble happens, how would the judges know what to do? Well, their background is quite along the lines of the Egyptians. Then they would be in the land of the Canaanites. And so the only way that they would learn how to deal with their own people would be from their experiences, which is not what God wants them to do. So in Exodus chapter 19, we are told that if they obey God's instructions, then they will be a special people to God, a treasured people, a holy nation. Now, how do you know a nation is holy? By them obeying the instructions of God. So, in these few chapters that we are reading, they contain the instructions of God that is to govern the man to man interaction. When a person is victimized, when a person is oppressed, when somebody steals something, all of these violations will break the peace and harmony of the community. And so, in any human community, even in our own, when somebody violates that, then justice must be served. And so this chapter that we're getting in is a continuation from chapter 21. In verse 1, it is really in the Hebrew Bible the continuation of the last verse of chapter 21. Now, it didn't matter to us this time because chapters 21, 22, 23, and 24, they're all in a sequence. And these are the mitzvot that is to govern the mishpat, the judgments. God wants them to make just judgments, not biased to any single party. So let's begin. We go away by learning the principles of justice. How can one be just? The essential details may not matter very much to us because we're not living in such an environment, but the principles behind that must stand because that represents the justice of God. He says, if a man steals, the idea of steal literally means to carry away, carry away. Uh, I guess you could say that it is a form of thievery. But when you carry away something, you are stealing. So in the Hebrew concept, it gives us the connotation somebody comes in and carries away your ox or sheep. Now, in this particular verse, the ox or sheep is the specific animal being dealt with. If somebody secretly carries away an ox or a sheep, slaughters it means to kill it or sell it, then he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox, 4 sheep for a sheep. Now, what does that mean? The first principles I think all of us need to bear in mind is this is coveting somebody else's ox and sheep and takes action on that covetousness to carry it away. Now, if you carry it away, then you realize that at the end of the day, there is a concept of restitution. Now, this word here is shalem. Restore is shalem. It is pay in full. This is not to return. Notice if somebody carries away an ox or a sheep, kills it or sells it, and in this case, it is found out. We need to be very clear, but because if it's not found out, there's nothing to judge on. It must be found out and placed before the judge. Eventually, I think we will all understand this. The concept of stealing is that when somebody carries it away, and if nobody knows about it, there's no judgment to be passed. And in this case, if a judgment is passed, he must have been found out, and he shall pay back in full 5 oxen for an ox or 4 sheep for a sheep. This means that there is a penalty that the judge will have to impose on one who is caught carrying away quietly. The principle is there needs to be restitution. In a community, when such a thing happens, sorry doesn't make the cut. And in the eyes of God, in the judgments of God, in the justice of God, there needs to be a payback as a penalty. So 5 oxen for an ox, 4 sheep for a sheep. But this really refers only to an ox and a sheep. Verse 2 says, if the thief is found breaking in. So now we are talking about another case. We have a thief. The thief is somebody who quietly comes to take things. It is the noun of this verb. If the stealer, if you want to use that word. So we have an English word called thief. He is found breaking in. Found breaking in, and this one would be at night. In this case, it will be at night. And he is struck and he dies. There is no guilt for his bloodshed. The idea here is he has no blood. He has no blood would be how it would be translated. He has no blood. Now, what does that mean? It means this. In the night, if he comes in, and he happens to be found by the owner of the house. And the owner of the house strikes him and he dies. He has no guilt for his bloodshed, means the person who struck this thief is not liable. When a thief comes in the middle of the night, he would try to kill whoever finds him out. And so in this case, there is a concept of, how should we say, self-defense. In the case of a self-defense, there is no liability for the owner. That's the principle. Because the thief who comes in will kill him if he is found out. And in this instance, in the case that is brought to our eyes and attention, that the owner kills him first and he dies, the owner has no liability. However, in verse 3, if the sun has arisen on him, him would be the thief, there will be guilt for his bloodshed. Now, this instance tells us this. When the sun has arisen means there are witnesses. When it's obvious that he has broken into the house, it's in the daytime. And the principle here is if the thief comes into the daytime and he is found out, he will likely run away. But if the owner of the house strikes him and kills him, he is guilty. The owner is guilty. At night, because it's self-defense, it's seen as self-defense, he is not liable. In the daytime, he cannot kill him because there will be witnesses around who can see. Now, if he is found, or if the thief is found, he should make full restitution. That would be shalem, right? He needs to do a shalem, a full restitution. If he has nothing, he can be sold for his theft. We saw this in chapter 21. A person can be sold into slavery for a period of time to pay back what he can't pay. Verse 4, if the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, meaning that when they've caught him, that the theft, meaning whatever he had tried to steal, is alive, whether an ox, a donkey, or a sheep, he shall shalem double. Now, in this case, it means two times. And the idea of restoration is shalem. Now, please understand the Hebrew concepts here. Shalem is a verb. It is to pay in full. After you've paid in full, there is shalom, which is a noun. And so we have peace. There is nothing owing anymore. And so once shalem is done, there is shalom. So it is important now for us to appreciate the concept of shalom and shalem. Now, as we are reading this in chapters 21, 22, 23, and 24, all of these are to do with judgments. I hope you understand that. These judgments are not in the hands of the homeowner, and it's not in the hands of the witnesses. The witnesses will bear witness. The homeowner, in this case, if he strikes the thief and he dies in the night, he is not liable. But if it's in the morning where it is broad daylight, he cannot kill the person because he knows who that person is. And the thief is likely to run away, and there will be enough witnesses to testify. And so There will be liability if the owner kills the thief in the day. But whatever that may be, in these few chapters, it is about judgments for the judge. And so we are now reading this uh, to understand and to appreciate what is the justice of God. And so the principle is always about restitution. There is no such thing uh, about modern day that says sorry is enough. In a more practical way of living, sorry is just by the way. If you're sorry, you still have to pay back, right? So that is the case here. So let's continue. Verse 5, if a man causes a field or a vineyard to be burned. Now, what does it mean to be burned? It means that to cause to be consumed by fire. I think that would be a better way. To cause to be consumed by fire. As you know, fire, when it crosses a land, it will eat up whatever is in the way. So this idea of graze means to cause to be consumed by fire. It's like an animal let loose to eat everything in his path in some way, and lets loose his animal, and this animal goes and eats in another man's field, he shall make restitution. Again, this word is shalem. From the best of his own field and pay back to the other man's field, or the best of his own vineyard. There is no such thing that says sorry is everything. The concept of shalem is very important. Restitution, I think, would be a word that should stay in our mind. Restitution. Justice is when there is restitution. It's not about saying sorry. Next, verse 6. If fire breaks out, catches in thorns, so that the stacked grain, standing grain, or the field is consumed, that will be the agricultural harvest. He who lit the fire shall surely make restitution. Now, the idea of restitution, uh, I think it's important for us to understand this. Verse 6 has a bit of I guess, a bit of a challenge here. This word in verse 6 is very is in the Hebrew verse 5. You Something causes the fire to break out, and it burns thorn bushes that is around the field, and when they have harvested, put it aside, the fire burns the grain or the field, then the restitution must be done. Then this is shalem. There is no such thing as I'm sorry, right? Verse 7. If a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles which is precious to keep, it's like keeping the command. This would be to guard, to protect. So please bear in mind, to guard and to protect the commands of God is the same as keeping something that is precious. You must guard it, make sure it's not stolen. But it is stolen out of the man's house. Now the thief is found, the thief will have to pay double. Just like this, restore double, pay double. If the thief is not found, so what happens? So this man says, but I've lost my money or the article. The master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. So the determination here is to see whether the master of the house stole or not. And who will determine? The judges. Now, in verse 7, you'd find that uh, the judges here is the word Elohim. Now, you may not know it, so I'll tell you now. Judges are Elohim. Angels are Elohim. Kings are Elohim. Idols are Elohim. God himself, who made the heavens and the earth, is Elohim. And so the Elohim word in Hebrew is quite broad. And here in this case, the translator has given it to you as judges, but it really is the word Elohim. So the Elohim passes judgments because they are empowered to make justice happen. So each of this is really a series of cases, I suppose you can see. Now, I think in verse 5, uh, it is, how should we say? Um, Let me come back to verse 5. We come to verse 9. Verse 9 tells us this: for any kind of trespass. Now, this, I guess you can say this idea of trespass is about I guess you can say a rebellion, right? A rebellion. Anybody who comes and does a rebellion, and that would be the word pesha. This is the word pesha. If there is a rebellion, we're not talking about human rebellion here, any. We are talking about an animal rebellion, whether an ox, a donkey, a sheep, and there is a trespass, something that is caused to be hurt or lost, or clothing, or any kind of lost thing. Now, what is lost is avad, meaning you can't find it, and then claims to be his. Now, this idea of claim means he says that it is his. Then we are told that the cause of both parties shall come before the Elohim. And whomever the Elohim condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. Now, condemn means find guilty. And he shall pay double to the neighbor who lost the thing. Any kind of thing. Now, this essentially, you find that this requires judges to be really wise. Brings us back to thinking about Solomon. Kings are expected to sort out problems of their people. And so David, Solomon, they are all judges for the nation. There will be people who are appointed as judges. And so what is important is the cases need to be heard and the judges need to be fair. But whatever the judges decide will be the finality. You find that in the Eastern culture, when you have a judge, like in China, you have that story of Bao Qingtian, the judge who is sent and he is all wise, and he will get to the bottom of the issue. That's the concept here, that God wants to see justice done. And so if both makes claims, then the judge must decide who is the guilty party. If a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey, ox, sheep, or any animal to keep, to guard, and that animal dies, hurt, or driven away, and nobody saw it, then it will be a case of he says, she says. Then an oath of God shall be made between them both, and that he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods, meaning this person, this neighbor, did not steal the donkey, ox, sheep, or animal it in his time of keeping, and the owner of it shall accept, and he shall not make it good. Meaning, the neighbor, this is the neighbor who is keeping, they make an oath. Now, why is an oath so important here? Now, we may not understand why the oath is important, but the oath is really to it's really a do or die swearing, because if you swear by the name of God, it must be true. This is the origins of the court swearing. But in these days, when God had given these judgments to the Israelites carry a certain fear in their heart that if they invoke the name of God in a formal swear, it had better be true. If not, God will strike them dead. And if they say that, no, I have not taken your animal, the owner who passed that animal to the neighbor must accept it. There is no need, no shalem needed. That's what it means. But if in fact it is stolen from him, he shall make shalem to the owner. That is what it means. If it is stolen from him, meaning if the neighbor found that the animal that he was keeping was stolen, he should make good because it was in his care. That is justice, right? That is justice. This is a challenge to some people. You can see in verse 11 and verse 12 here. It is for the neighbor who was entrusted to make sure that he has no part in losing the animal. If that animal is torn to pieces by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence that it's not him who did it, and he shall not make good what was torn, because it is clearly an animal that did it. What basically this passage is saying is this: there is a certain obligation of the neighbor if he agrees to take care of somebody else's donkey, ox, or sheep or animal. Why? Because there needs to be a certain sense of responsibility. Else, if anything happens to the animal, and if it's his negligence, and that it is stolen because of his negligence, he needs to repay. But if it's not his negligence, then he doesn't have to repay. So you can see that justice is important. The person who owns the animal needs to get his animal back. But if it's not the fault of the person who is entrusted to take care of it, then it's too bad. But if the person who is entrusted did not do a good job to protect it and allows it to be stolen, then it's restitution. Verse 14. Now, verse 14 says that if a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it becomes injured or dies, what does that mean? Borrows means, in all these cases, an animal. Why is that important? Because in the kind of life they have there, an ox, a sheep, a donkey, or any animal is used to work, and it is valuable. Then it says, the owner of it not being with it, he shall surely make it good. Because the owner is not there to take care of his animal, then the man who borrows the animal has full responsibility. And so that person needs to definitely needs to shalem. We keep seeing this word shalem. I hope that by now you will appreciate it. Now, if its owner was with it, which means that the owner was lending, but lending in a way where he has full control of the animal, and the animal becomes injured or dies, then the man who borrows need to make good. Do not need to shalem. If it was hired, it came for its hire. Now, what does that mean? It came for its hire. Uh, Literally means it's a hired animal, and the man who borrows is paying for it. And so, whatever is being paid for, the owner is in full control and he makes some money out of it. Now, that's justice in that sense because the owner is controlling the animal and the owner is making money out of the man who borrows it. So it is not fair for the man who borrows it, who has no control over the animal, to then make restitution to pay for the entire animal because he has already paid for the use of the animal. Now we come to some more challenging, right? More challenging verses. As you can see, in verse 16, it's about people treatment. People treatment is always very difficult. People treatment in verse 16. He says, if a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed, this idea of seduction is to persuade. I think that would be to seduce, to persuade. And in this case, batula means a girl who has never had sex and she is not betrothed, means she is not uh, in the process of the marriage. In modern terms, people call it an engagement, but in the old days, there's no such thing as an engagement. When a woman is booked for marriage, she is technically married. It's just not consumed. So we're not talking about a woman who has never had sex, but a man persuades her and lies with her and have sex with her. The judgment is that he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. Now, the bride price is in this case a mahor. I think that would be a better way of saying it. A mahor, which is the dowry. Very similar in Arabic terms. Uh, and and it is to say that if a man goes and persuades a girl who's not married and lies with her, and the lying with her is equated to the consummation, then he is as good as having married her. And hence, the justice would be complete the deal, pay the mahor, and make her your bride. Now, if the father refuses to give her to him, the father doesn't like the man, then he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. Now, the bride price of virgins is also a mahor. Mean if the father refuses to give her to him, then this man who seduced the girl has to pay the mahor, and the father will take care of the girl. But whatever it may be, you find that this is a case when it's found out. If it's not found out, there is no judgment to be made. If it is found out, the father has a say. Now, I think one of the cultural differences is this. In the Hebrew culture, when a child is not married, the child is under the authority of the parents. And in a patriarchal society, the father owns that. And if the father decides not to allow the girl to marry the man, well, the man still needs to pay, but doesn't have to take her for the wife because it is not permitted by the father. Now, in this case, you'll find that the authority, the absolute authority of the girl is with the father. And that's the culture of the day. But there is no such thing called sorry and walk away. There is a judgment to be made. Verse 18. Verse 18 says this: you shall not permit a sorceress to live. When it says you shall not permit a sorceress to live, this is a judgment by the courts. There is no such judgments that goes unilaterally where the common folk makes a decision. It's always with the court. Eyewitnesses, the victim, the aggressor, all must appear before the court. So whenever you read, you shall not permit, is that the system must not allow a sorceress. A sorceress means a woman who practices sorcery, who uses witchcraft. Now, this is something that you need to understand. Right? This is like witchcraft. There is an element of magic, enchantment that certain people can do, which is related to the supernatural realm. And God does not permit any of these because this form of magic, this form of illusion, this form of trickery, this form of persuasion will always lead a person to be more curious about the sorcery than about God. And so anything that distracts man from God is not permitted. Right? That's how we would read this here. Verse 19, whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. The people cannot take action on himself or herself. This has to be a judgment by the courts. That it's proven before a shadow of a doubt that this idea lies with an animal is to have sex. This is bestiality. Humans can have sex. Animals between themselves can have sex. But an animal and a man is unnatural and thereby shall be put to death because it violates the laws of the Almighty. Verse 20. It says, he who makes offerings. Now understand, sacrifice is to slaughter an animal. Slaughter animal to Elohim. Elohim here could be idols. It could be angels. This would be from a unseen realm. Except to Jehovah only. He shall be utterly destroyed. The idea of destroyed means he will be removed, right? He will be removed. The only one that you actually make sacrifices is to Jehovah, not to angels, because there's no intermediary to Jehovah. And so all the Levitical rights in chapters 1 to 7 of the offerings is only to approach God. It is never to approach anyone else. Verse 21. It says, "You shall neither mistreat." Now understand this word mistreat is cause violence. Cause violence. It also means to do wrong. To a Ger or oppress him. Uh, and 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 this word oppress him here would be to squeeze him. It says, "For you were strangers in the land of Egypt." What about the Ger, really? The Ger is somebody like Ruth, who has embraced the God of Israel, the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, and will be a part of Israel. So you cannot do anything wrong against such a person, because such a person had left their nation, left their God, and embraced and took on this new nation. You cannot squeeze him. God has given provisions that justice towards the Ger is higher than justice to the native, if you think of it that way. Because a Ger owns no land, comes from outside the nation, but God wants all Israelites to make sure they do not mistreat the Ger, because they are already disadvantaged joining the nation. They have no land, they have to work, they have to do things in order to make money. And so, in so doing, you need to defend the Ger. You also find in verse 23, "You shall not afflict." Now, this word afflict means to, I guess you can say, to humiliate, humiliate, uh, to weaken any widow or fatherless child. Now, remember, a widow is a woman with no husband. A fatherless child is a child with no father. That means that the widow and the fatherless child has no man to defend them. And so God says, make sure you do not afflict or humiliate or weaken them ever further, because the widow and the fatherless child is already very weak in the society. If you afflict them in any way, they cry at all to me and they complain to God. Notice, this is not a judgment in the sense of a crime, but it is a social obligation. If they mistreat the widow, the father, and the Ger, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will become so hot, and I will kill you with the sword. That means a foreign nation will be sent after you. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. And this is the threat. Now, I guess we should understand that justice to the widow and fatherless is not a criminal offense, but it is a social obligation that God has placed on the Israelites. The weak of the society cannot be stepped on by the rest of society. That's injustice. And when you read in the prophet books, it is always about Hamas. It's about violence and injustice, besides idolatry, that is. That God will send a foreign nation to deal with them after the third or fourth generation. And so I think we may not be aware that God's way of justice is to take care of the poor, the needy, and the weak, where those who can afford, who is able, must play the role to take care of such people. Verse 25. If you lend money to any of my people, we're talking about the Israelites. We're not talking about the Moabites or the Egyptians who are poor amongst you. This is important. You shall not be like a money lender to him. Now, a money lender is a genuine occupation. A money lender makes money from interest that he collects because he lends somebody money, and the person agrees to give a slightly higher amount, which is called an interest of whatever the amount borrowed, and that would be a business transaction. But if we talk about the poor among them, then it is not called money lending. You're still lending money, but it's not called money lending. It is called helping. You shall not charge him any interest. He's already poor. You don't make him any poorer still. You can take back your base that you have loaned, right? So in verse 26, what is justice in this case? If you take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, meaning I want a guarantee that you will pay me back, so I'll take your coat. You shall return it to him before the sun goes down. Why? Because it will get cold and he will need his coat. You can't be torturing him, for that is his only covering. That's why he's poor. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? It will be that when he cries to me, I will hear, for I am Hanan, gracious. God will want to take care of the poor, and the rich must take care of the poor. Even though you have taken it as a guarantee, you must make sure that you have grace. This is grace. The idea of grace in verse 27 is, well, in this case, it's an adjective, hanun, but it comes from the verb hanan is to show favor, have pity. He is already so poor. You may have taken it as a guarantee, but he will be cold to death if he doesn't sleep with his coat. And so have some pity. Now, why is this mentioned in this way? Is that when you are supposed to help a poor, and yes, you have the right to take a pledge, a guarantee, but it is important that you need to make sure that there is a certain amount of loving kindness. There's a certain amount of pity and being merciful. And that is justice. And you would expect that from God as well. And so God is just. If you expect it from God, then you should be able to extend it to the people you help. Because if you torture those people you help, that is not helping. You're still doing it as a business. And that has nothing to do with these instructions. Verse 28. He says, you shall not revile God nor curse a ruler of your people. And this is not about cursing God. First of all, this word is kalal. Kalal means make trivial. Make trivial your Elohim, which are your judges, or your Nasi, the rulers of your people. Both are stating the same thing. These are people who have authority in the community, and they represent the justice of God. So don't treat what they do as trivial, which also means the judges and the leaders should not treat their role or entrusted responsibility as trivial. Because God gave them that right to rule over the people, one must do so fairly and justly. Verse 29. Verse 29 says, "You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce." This is first, the first fruit. I think that would be the first of your ripe offering, the first fruits, the first of your produce. I think that would be uh, an expectation that God would want them to make sure they acknowledge and give thanksgiving to God. I think that would be much more important. This is the offering of your first fruits and your abundance, right? And your juices, your abundance, your thanksgiving. I think that would be a way of looking at it. Your thanksgiving. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Now, this is an important element. At this point in time, the firstborn is important. The first fruits you give to God, your first of your, well, I guess the first of your abundance. And it should be the best of it. But the firstborn of your sons is what God wants. God owns the firstborn of your sons. The firstborn of your sons is the Bakor. They are to serve God. At this point in time, it is very clear that at the Exodus, in Exodus chapter 13, the firstborn belongs to God. Now, later on in the book of Numbers, chapter 3 and 4, you find that God modified that. God made a change to the ruling that they can redeem their firstborn, and God wants the tribe of Levi to serve him. There is a change, and that change comes somewhere in chapter 36, where they had made the golden calf. And the Levites stood by God, whereas the rest of them had stood against God. And so the firstborn of the tribes is no longer interesting to God because the tribe of Levi gave themselves to God. And God says, I want them. I don't want the firstborn. And so the firstborn can be redeemed. Please see Numbers chapters 3 and 4. So likewise, you shall do with your oxen, your sheep. It will be his mother 7 days, and on the eighth day you shall give it to me. What is this? These are your firstborn of ox and sheep. God wants a firstborn. It belongs to God as well. So it will be dedicated to the Levites. Now, the last line here is important. You shall be holy men to me. You shall be holy men to me. Now, the word men here is holy mortal men. You are special. When you listen to me, you are special to me. Because you are special to me, you shall not eat any meat which is found in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. Now, this word, throw it to the dogs. They have dogs, and the dogs will eat whatever is not holy. Now, this is a literal way of saying, no, this is the getting rid. It is not to throw to the non-Israelites. It is really to say that the meat will be bad, so give it to the unclean animals to get rid of it. But you shall not eat. Why? Because you are holy. If you're holy, you need to be clean. If you are If the animal is torn by beasts, that is unclean. It is not properly slaughtered. And so get rid of it and pass it to the dogs in this case, the caliph. Now, why the dogs? It means that the dogs is able, or it doesn't fall within, is not in the kosher law. And metaphorically, the dogs also would mean Gentiles. Metaphorically, the Gentiles do not have such obligation. And so only Israel, or only the Israelites, are called holy. The Gentiles are not called holy people. So the Gentiles is allowed to eat of meat that is torn by beasts, that is not properly slaughtered, if you want to put it that way. It is important now for us to appreciate that there are two sets of people that God is talking to, particularly in verse 31. It's about food, the clean and unclean. But when it comes to the human interaction, there is no such thing that the Gentiles can do it, but the Jews or the Israelites can't. The human interaction laws are universal. The kosher law, the feast law, the ritual law, they are very specific to Israel. And hence, in verse 31, gives us an explanation that the Gentiles is okay for them to eat, because God in Genesis chapter 9 says that you can eat everything. God has given you all things as food. But in Leviticus chapter 11, God is very clear that they can't. Now, we are not quite there yet. So these are brief descriptions of what more mitzvot will be coming out as to what is clean and unclean. But herein lies the clarity between Israel and the rest. In universal laws, every human being needs to observe. In ritual laws, that only the Israelites are called holy men and must be obligated to take care of the holy rituals and foods. And so, with this, we come to the end of our session today.